Hello and welcome to Joy of Books with me, Miss Joy. Today's book is The Secret Footballer. The author is anonymous. This non-fiction book was released in 2013 and contains 256 pages. Sharing his views on the book today is big football fan TC.
It is often said that 95% of what happens in football takes place behind closed doors. Many of these stories I shouldn't be telling you, but I will. So begins this book, which is essentially a series of newspaper articles that were printed in the Guardian broadsheet newspaper in England by this anonymous ex-footballer. I'm not sure if I buy the whole story, I will be honest. Like I say, the very fact that it's a book of articles rather than a carefully crafted narrative suggests to me that it probably was a journalist who's put together lots of stories and made a fortune out of doing so. And fair play to them, by the way. There are, of course, conspiracy theories galore suggesting who this author may be. Some people suggest that it's somebody who played in London. Some people say it's somebody who's been up north. We know a few facts about this person. We know that they signed their first professional contract at 21. So they came quite late into the game. We know that they were in a relationship, stayed in a relationship for the duration of their career and beyond. And we also know that they were at one point a record transfer for their club. So piecing it all together, the name that crops up a lot is the name Dave Kitson. He played for Stoke City, among other clubs. So it could well be, but like I say, I'm going to go with my left field theory that this is a journalist who's collated many articles and stories from the top Premier League footballers and very cleverly put them together and passed them off as this anonymous writer, which of course is a gimmick. But so until the real author of this work, if it's not a journalist, steps forward, then to be honest, any conspiracy theory flies. Why did I read this book? Well, I love football. It really drew me in early on, actually, because he referred to collecting Mexico 86 stickers in a Panini sticker album. So if anybody is out there that's of a certain age, they'll know what I'm talking about there. Clearly, the footballer, like myself, will be in his mid-40s now because that was the kind of peak Mexico 86 collector. And as I mentioned, it refers to his coming into the game late on, being offered £500 a week contract. And really from the very off, he didn't really enjoy the experience of being a professional footballer. Now, this is unusual because, of course, everybody and his dog is seeking to become rich, famous, and a professional footballer is obviously synonymous with both of those. In fact, when he walked into the dressing room when he started, the older professional players seemed to look down on him, and he was disgusted by their attitude, which was that they were only interested in the money, and that was it. So this is my issue with the book. He's not glorifying these aspects of being a footballer, the money, for example, and the perks that come with it. He is kind of rallying against it, but doesn't really do anything conspicuous to or political to change things. So that's my issue with the person. And again, the fact that he never did stick up for what he felt was right at any time, or not all the time anyway, again leads me to think that it's probably a journalist who's put these stories together and made a fortune. So let's have a look at some of the aspects of it then. So he talks about having success, being Player of the Year twice, having the club record move. He talks about overseas trips to Korea, Vegas and Dubai, the money that's lavished in Las Vegas on drinks and women. I think one woman was being touted for $30,000, I think there. So, footballers, they're on mega money and they're not scared to spend it. Well, most of them. So the narrator himself suggests that he doesn't spend money as lavishly without any real vice. He talks about hiring a villa for a few weeks in the summer and inviting all his friends and family there. And that's about the extent of his lavishness, if you like. So it doesn't really focus too much on the football side. There are a few stories in there about Antonio Valencia being so solid that he pretty much kicked this narrator, out of the stand once. So some people have suggested that it might be Dave Kitson because there is footage on YouTube of that incident. So I can understand that. It talks also about dealing with opposition players, when they're doing things that maybe they shouldn't be, saying things they maybe shouldn't say to get the edge over their opponent. So I'm sure that goes on in all sports there. There's a lovely section on Paul Scholes, and he talks about him being so good that he actually deliberately pretended to be stretching his hamstrings while watching Scholes warming up himself and looking at his touch on the ball, which was incredible, apparently. But generally, though, it's all on about the off the pitch events. Talks about Seth Johnson of Leeds going in with his agent, expecting to get £15,000 per week. That's a huge amount of money. But the then Leeds chairman, Peter Ridsdale, offering £40,000 a week and saying, we can't go above 40,000. The craziness of the money in football, and really no laughing matter, because Leeds as a club were really on the brink of ruin because of such careless financial management. Outrageous, really. A player, Seth Johnson, £40,000. I mean, unbelievable. You're making millionaires of these players who are not even that good at football. Yeah, I didn't like that bit. I mean, just generally with this book, I just felt it was a bit gimmicky. The idea of there being a secret footballer. Just be honest. If it's Dave Kitson, just put your name on it and hold your hand up and face responsibility. I know you're worried about legal action, but there's no stories in here that I haven't heard before. In fact, I've read Peter Crouch's book recently, How to Be a Footballer. He's got 10 times more stories in that book, and I would say they're 20 times more scandalous. So if he's not fearful of being sued, then there's no reason for this secret footballer, or so-called secret footballer, to be living in fear, is there? I mean, one of the stories, for example, was about two players in a hotel room betting on two raindrops, which one would reach the bottom of the window first. Again, I know the story very well. I've read that in several football books. And again, this leads me to believe that the secret footballer is a journalist who's just collated lots of stories. Another example is Under the Kosh podcast, if you've ever listened to that show. Great show for adults, of course, but loads of those stories have been told on that show, and much, much better ones as well. So football fans who follow those kind of podcasts and read those sorts of books, they're going to know all these stories and more. There was nothing in there that I hadn't heard before. I think there was one thing, which was Chelsea on a pre-season tour in America. They agreed to take a picture with Samsung and their various workers, and because they hadn't offered the Chelsea players any incentives like free, I don't know, what was I going to say, videos, DVDs, David Bowie LPs. No, because they hadn't done that, the then manager Jose Mourinho told them all to get back on the coach, and they weren't going to get out until they received what was right. I mean, again, that was a new story, but it just showed footballers and for being what they are really, which is overpaid, entitled, privileged, greedy at times, careless, reckless, all those things. Okay, probably all the things that some humans want to be, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just jealous that I didn't become a professional footballer and make a lot of money. Could be, but honestly, this book just comes across like some of these autobiographies do, entitled, self-absorbed, and bitter. And that's, again, they're all words that I'd associate with journalists linked to sport. I was a journalist myself. I started out in journalism in London. And that's why I still believe that this secret footballer is not a footballer at all, but rather a journalist. I mean, he mentions battle with depression, for example, but you don't feel sorry for him. It comes across as a little bit contrived. It's almost like a throwaway comment that he had depression, sitting in a chair for hours on end. I just didn't feel that this book was very well written at all. Very robotic writing style. Again, very much typical of a journalist. It didn't really come from the heart, this one. He mentions his battle with depression, for example, but you don't feel sympathy for him because the writing quality is just not there. It's not justified, not warranted. It just comes across as a very wealthy young person with too much money, kind of looking for some kind of validation. It doesn't work. It's like, those people who try and justify themselves or excuse themselves before they say something outrageous, like a racist comment. It doesn't justify that if you excuse yourselves for doing that. And, there's times in there where he lambasts his teammates for having affairs, yet watches them from across the street when they go into brothels of Amsterdam with the ladies of the night. Very, very hypocritical. Yeah, the other reason I think that it might be a journalist is because in the opening chapter, when he's just made it and made this big move, he's got his first professional contract, and he talks about how people told him, don't talk to the media, don't talk to journalists. But then he does kind of reference a journalist. So if I were a sports journalist and I'd want to kind of have a good reputation, then I'd probably include them somewhere in the book. So there's lots of clues there. I don't doubt that journalist might have some kind of friendship with footballers who probably contribute a lot of the stories, Dave Kitson, for example. But I don't think all of these stories are just from one player, because they come from geographically such varied places. It's that old "methinks the lady doth protest too much" argument. I mean, the foreword is written by the deputy editor of The Guardian. So, which editor of The Guardian would ever write forward for essentially a trashy book, almost apologetically as well? And he gets his wife, or his wife in inverted commas, to talk about knowing this footballer before he had anything, before he had any money. Yet by the end of the book, they're talking about, he was having to sell his old football shirts that he'd exchanged with other professionals, There's a whole section on agents, again, Q&A. Whenever you see Q&A in a book, walk away, because you're not going to get enough depth from a Q&A. You just can't. It's impossible. Overall, I was very, very disappointed with this book. There are much better books out there. I've already mentioned the Peter Crouch one, but you can really take your pick from some of these. And at least with those ones, that they are genuinely the thoughts and life story of those footballers, not a journalist hiding behind a metaphorical wall. Now, with all of the hype around this book, and it's continued because obviously the longer the so-called footballer remains anonymous, the more people are going to want to know who that footballer is. But like I say, I do not believe a footballer has written this. I believe it's a journalist. It's got that very reportage style of writing that a professional footballer would not have access to that. And this footballer has claimed to have read, Joyce as a young, boy when taken on holiday by his father. That nonsense. Just nonsense. A journalist might have been taken, a teacher might have been taken on holiday and read Joyce, a writer might have been taken, not a footballer. Sorry. For me, it's not a footballer at all. This is a journalist posing as a secret footballer. It's just another thing I hate about this book. Don't go near it.
Well, thank you very much for your interesting review of this book, TC. The Secret Footballer is available from all good book outlets. Thank you for joining me, and please remember to like and subscribe to Joy of Books.